Part 4, Chapter 7. The Taking of the Palladium. The bow of Heracles had performed the task for which the gods had brought it to Troy by killing Paris, yet the war still lingered on. Since Deiphobus and Helenus, rivals for the leadership of the Trojans, both aspired to marry Helen. Deiphobus, who was the greater fighter, was at last victorious, whereupon Helenus fled to Mount Ida in fear for his life. The Greeks, who had hoped that the death of Paris would end the long struggle, were greatly disheartened. Again, it was Odysseus who gave them fresh courage by leading a party up Mount Ida to capture Helenus. Helenus, like his twin sister Cassandra, has the gift of prophecy, he pointed out. Out of jealousy of Deiphobus, or in fear of his life, he will tell us how we can take Troy. I only know that Troy cannot be taken as long as the Palladium stands on the citadel, declared Helenus, smiling slightly, for he thought it would hardly be possible for the Greeks to remove the Palladium without capturing the city first. The Palladium was a small wooden image, hardly more than a tree trunk, roughly carved to represent a woman with a spear in her hand. It was very old and was said to have fallen from the heaven in the days of Ilius, grandfather of Priam, and as a symbol of the god's special favor toward Troy. It stood in a little wooden temple of Athena in the midst of the citadel, and the priestesses who served it were among the noblest women of Troy. The Greek chiefs looked blankly at one another, discouraged by Helenus' words. Odysseus said nothing to help them, and for some time thereafter he was not seen in the camp at all. Early next morning, however, when the Trojan gates were opened for the herdsmen to drive in cattle for slaughter, an old Greek beggar limped up to the gates of Troy. The old man was sturdy-looking, but lame and pitifully ragged. He had been dreadfully beaten, to judge by the marks on his half-covered shoulders and arms, while his eyes were red as fire from weeping. His tongue, however, was ready enough, and he was soon showing off his welts to a half-curious, half-pitying crowd, while whining for alms and telling them his tale. He had been one of the men of the Palamedes, he said, and as such had drawn down upon himself the special anger of the crafty Odysseus. For a while after Palamedes' death, Ajax had protected him. Now, however, his enemies had driven him from his hut and reduced him to beggary, since he was too old and crippled to defend what was rightly his. He had taken to wandering through the camp, lending a hand to the stewards of the herdsmen in return for a meal, and had not been above snatching at another man's food when his need was the most great. This last had been his undoing, for he had been caught by the Ithacans and hauled before Odysseus, who had had him scourged out of the camp. "Pity a poor old man," whined he, "who fought with heroes once. My father was a friend of King Tyndareus, who trusted me with the training of his young sons Castor and Pollux. When I slew a man in a quarrel, for I was hot-blooded in those days, and I fled for my life to Palamedes, who made me a captain among his men." "If you knew Castor and Pollux," said one, "their sister Helen will gladly give you alms. Tidings of their death have reached her, but she does not know how or when they died." "Thank you, kind citizen," said the old man, cringing. "Will you not give something to a poor man, that Helen may see her friends are well received in Troy?" "Helen lives in the house of Deiphobus," said the citizen calmly. "It lies by the citadel, nearest to Hector's, and any man will tell you the way. As to alms, Helen herself may reward you as you deserve." The old man hobbled off up the street, muttering resentfully, while a little group of idlers lounged after him, curious to see the meeting between Helen and a Greek after all these years. Helen came hurrying out into her courtyard, with two maids behind her, while the old man raised his face and fixed his clear gray eyes on hers. Helen halted, and her cheeks went pale as marble. Her lips opened, but no sound came. "Pity a poor old man," whined the beggar rapidly. "I bring you news of your brothers, who live, though no longer on earth. One day they feast with the gods, and the next they sleep in death. Thus each is half immortal and shares their pleasure of the blessed ones." "Come in and tell me more," said Helen faintly. "Forgive me, old man, I think the sight of a friend of my youth has taken away my wits." She turned back into the house with the beggar limping after her. The spectators scattered disappointed, while in her own room behind the great hall, Helen faced the Greek alone. "Odysseus," said she, "how dare you come into Troy? I knew you through your disguise." "I wooed you," said he, "and stayed long with your father, but few men here have seen me without a helmet shading my face. I came on an embassy once, but that was long ago. Nevertheless, you are in great danger. Why are you here? Perhaps to see Helen, for whose beauty many men have risked their lives. I am a Trojan now, said she, and you are a spy. Why should I not cry out your name in the streets of the town? Helen, said he, leaning forward earnestly, you were proud of Menelaus' wealth and power. You loved Paris, who binds you to Deiphobus. What do you suppose? Answered she bitterly. Do you think the Trojans love me after all these years of war? I must have a protector who is powerful in Troy. The great Trojan champions are all dead, and the war draws to a close. What if the Greeks take Troy? Who will protect you then? Helen's wide blue eyes were fixed on him, and she sat very still. Help me now, said he urgently, and I will tell Menelaus that your heart is turned to him, though you are kept in Troy against your will. Who knows? You may again spin your fine purple wools in Sparta, and see your daughter, Hermione, once more. What do you want? Who is the priestess in the temple of Athena? Theano, the wife of Antenor? He has always been of the peace party, and I think would be glad to be saved when Troy is taken, together with his sons and all his house. He has no hope for Troy, of that I am sure. You must help me to talk with Theano, but first, how many guard the citadel, and how many the Scion gate at night? Only 2 in each place, for the wall cannot be scaled, and that gate is never opened after dark. Very good. Now give me alms and a meal, as you might to a beggar, and send a message to Theano, that I may speak with her. Think kindly of Menelaus, if you can, for I know that he loves you still. There was a great outcry at the Scion gate that night when a man cut down the 2 sentries, drew the bolts, and fled out into the dark. Those who ran up just too late declared that their enemy was Odysseus, for one of them had seen him clearly by the light of the torch that burned near the gate. Remembering the beggar, men now realized the truth, but they had no suspicion of Helen, since Odysseus had spent a long day begging in all the principal palaces of the town. Men were amazed at his daring, but none could suggest a reason for the deed. We will double the guards at the gates for the future, said Deiphobus, and command them to examine more closely the people they admit to Troy. This was done, but more strangers asked to enter, and for a while the nights were peaceful as before. Odysseus was waiting for the passing of the full moon. This was done, but no more strangers asked to enter, and for a while the nights were peaceful as before. Odysseus was waiting for the passing of the full moon. On the first pitch-black night since Odysseus's adventure, 2 men stole over the plain to the point where the walls of Troy rose highest, since at this spot they were built over a cliff where the rocks at the edge of the citadel dropped down to the plain. There were only 2 guards along this wall, whispered Odysseus. Had not the moon been full, I could have taken the Palladium when I went into Troy. This part, they think, is too steep to be scaled, but you and I, Diomede, will climb it with a rope to help us. Get up on my shoulders and take hold where the rock is not so smooth. There is a ledge up there on which the wall is built, and you can stand on it while you let the rope down for me. Then you may mount on my shoulders again, and with a leap get your hands on the edge of the wall. He straddled his legs and stood waiting. His companion Diomede jumped on his shoulders and hoisted himself up into the dark. A stone, dislodged by his passing, bounced down the rocks and crashed to the ground. Both stiffened and stood still. After a long minute of silence, Odysseus again heard the cautious sounds of Diomede feeling his way towards the ledge in the rock above. Presently a rope came dangling through the darkness, and in another minute Odysseus stood beside his friend. "Keep on your belly as you go over the wall," he whispered, putting his mouth to the other's ear. "Dark as it is, someone might see us against the sky." "Where do we go?" "The temple of Athena lies besides the great white temple of Apollo. Theano, the priestess, has promised me that it will be unwatched tonight." "Will she keep faith?" "I have sworn to protect Antenor and all his house in the taking of Troy. He has always despaired of the future and is ready to save what he can." "I see." Diomedes swung himself up again, crouched on Odysseus' shoulders, and leaped for the top of the wall. Odysseus felt for the rope, but it was not there. He heard a shuffling sound on the wall, and a long sighing groan. Someone exclaimed sharply. A weapon fell with a clatter and a bounce off the wall, narrowly missing Odysseus on the ledge below. "Diomede!" he called gently, reflecting that without the rope he must stand on the ledge till dawn. "I came up between the guards," whispered Diomede from above him. "Did you hear me kill them? One was actually asleep." "Hurry then, and let down the rope. It will be dawn in an hour." Diomede laughed softly in the darkness. "This is no errand for two men," he whispered. "I will steal the palladium, while you stand there and catch it when I lower it on the rope." "This is my adventure," protested Odysseus as loudly as he dared. "This part is mine," answered Diomede, chuckling. "I am younger and lighter on my feet. Moreover, I am at the top of the wall." Odysseus, boiling with fury at being outwitted, waited for what seemed an endless time until he heard sounds above, and the rope with the image tied to it came jerkily into reach. In another moment Diomede landed heavily beside him and drew down the rope. Odysseus turned on his companion, but in an instant Diomede had whirled to let him see the sword in his hand. "They say no man gets the better of Odysseus and wins," he stated grimly. "I do not know the truth of this thing, but I will go first down the rope. I shall wait for you at the bottom, and while I carry the palladium, you may walk ahead." In the grey light of dawn, Odysseus came back to the camp, while Diomede stalked behind him, the palladium strapped to his back and the sharp sword ready in his hand. Chapter 5, The Fall of Troy. Part 5, The Fall of Troy. Chapter 1, The Trojan Horse. Although the palladium was captured, the Greeks could not yet take Troy by storm, but caused it to be spread about that they had decided to raise the siege and go home. Meanwhile, they constructed a huge wooden image of a horse in the belly of which a dozen men could lie concealed. The most daring heroes took their places in it, while the fleet actually put to sea and made sail. Across the ocean, in full view of Troy, lay a little island, once prosperous but during the long war abandoned and deserted. There the Greeks beached their ship, out of sight on the seaward side, while they sent men to its highest point to watch for the signal light that should summon them secretly back to Troy. Meanwhile, the gates of the city were flung open, and the populace of Troy ran shouting over the sandy plain to explore the deserted camp. Children swung on the palisade where Ajax and Hector had once met in fierce combat, or played hide-and-seek through the lanes along which Priam had driven by night to ransom his dead son. It was the first carefree day that the boys remembered, as they ran laughing down the banks of the Scamander, where Achilles had hurled Lycaon into the stream. A crowd of elders, approaching more soberly, gathered around the great horse, doubting whether the Greeks had built it in honor of a god or to bring some last sorrow to Troy. "Such an image must be sacred," said one. "It would be wise to build an altar near it and sacrifice to the gods who have delivered our city." "Burn it!" cried Lycaon, the priest of Poseidon. "I do not know what this is, but I have learned to fear even the gifts when they come from the Greeks. Who knows? There may be men within." He lifted his spear and hurled it with all his force at the creature's side. The weapon stuck quivering in the stout planks, while from within there echoed a hollow clang. "Hear the sound of armed men!" cried the priest. "Keep back!" shouted another. "The image is sacred, and such a clashing marks the anger of the gods." The people hesitated, looking to Priam for direction. But as they did so, a cry arose from the youths on the banks of the Scamander, who had found a man hiding in the rushes there. Overpowering him by sheer numbers, they bound his hands behind him and dragged him toward the group. The pent-up hysteria of 10 years seemed suddenly to explode at the sight of the stranger. A group of women rushed at him, clawing and kicking, while he ducked his head and cowered among his captors, crying out at the top of his voice. Kill me then!" he shrieked. "You can do no more than the Greeks." Some of the men leaped forward to his rescue, pulling back the women and thrusting them aside. "Bring the man here," called King Priam. "Let us at least learn what he has to say." The stranger flung himself at the feet of Priam, with his hair wildly disheveled and his pale face stripped with scratches and marked here and there with blood. "Let me die," he repeated wildly. "How can I live when both Greeks and Trojans cast me out?" "What is your story?" asked Priam coldly. "Why are you left to our mercy, seeing that we have no reason to love Greeks?" "My name is Sinon," said the spy, fixing his pale, cold eyes on King Priam. "I was friend of Palamedes, after whose death I boasted I would take vengeance on Odysseus, fool that I was. Lately, since Diomede broke into the temple of Athena and laid hands upon her most sacred image, the Palladium, the Greeks have utterly lost the favor of the gods. Indeed, their prophets say that they will be lucky if they come home dishonored, saving nothing but their lives. All agreed that their cause was hopeless, and for many days the wind would not even let them sail." He choked and paused for a moment. "That last is true," said Priam thoughtfully, "but go on." "Men began to think of the days of Aulis, and a saying through the host that the gods would once more demand a sacrifice. At that time I saw Odysseus talking with Calchas, and the eyes of both rested upon me. I was warned, but would not believe that the two were conspiring against my life. Men pressed Calchas to name the victim, and after he had pretended for a long time that he would not, he let himself be forced in seeming reluctance. He chose me. Yet you escaped. Men bound me to bring me to the altar where the priest waited with his knife, and I burst the thongs holding me and fled. For 2 days I have crouched in the reeds while the camp was filled with the bustle of departure. Now at last my enemies are gone, but they have left me to the Trojans, whose mercies are no tenderer. Kill me if you wish, for I am desperate with starvation, and seem to be hated by gods and men. Sinon looked up anxiously into the face of Priam, knowing that his fate and the lives of those in the horse depended on the success of his false tale. Old Priam regarded him with pity, for he was a desperate-looking sight, shivering and covered with mud from the marsh where he had lain. "This is a happy day for Troy," said the king, "and one on which is fitting to show mercy. Tell us, however, what is that horse, and why have the Greeks left it here on the plain?" Sinon had already on the tip of his tongue the story he had to tell, in order to persuade the Trojans to take the horse into town. "The gods bade us make a sacred image," he burst out, "and Calchas declared that if the Trojans destroyed it, ruin would fall on them. If, on the other hand, they placed it in the citadel, it would protect them, as the Palladium used to do. Moreover, as long as it stood in Troy, the city would increase in power until at last it would rule even over Greece. For this reason, Odysseus bade his comrades make the horse so large. The Trojans will never take it into the citadel, since to do so they would have to pull it down part of their wall," said he. There was a moment's silence while the people considered Sinon's words. "The man lies," said Laocoon sharply. "Will you never learn that you cannot trust a Greek?" "Perhaps he does," said King Priam doubtfully. "Yet if not, we may do great damage to our city by lifting our hands against the horse. Let us sacrifice to the gods who have delivered us, and in the course of our prayers they may send us a sign." The wise words of Priam were obeyed, and presently men brought sods to raise an altar by the seashore, while servants drove down a bull for the sacrifice, and Laocoon, Poseidon's priest, put on the sacred woolen bands of his office in order to raise his hands in prayer. Suddenly, a woman shrieked and pointed out to sea. 2 serpents were coiling around the water with dreadful speed toward the land. Paralyzed with fright, for a moment the crowd watched the flat heads rear above the surface, while the flickering tongues licked greedily at air. Black drops of poison ran from their jaws, and their hissing sound was heard above the breakers rolling up the sandy beach. The 2 creatures were in the shallows now. As they touched land, the crowd scattered, screaming. The monsters paid no attention to any save those against whom they had been sent. They flung themselves on 2 youths, Laocoon's sons, who had lingered too long near the shore, and wrapped them in their writhing coils. With a great cry, Laocoon himself rushed to the rescue of his children, but in another minute he too was helplessly entangled, while the fierce fangs of the monsters darted at his face. Shouting vainly for help, he wrenched at the coiling bodies, striving always to free his 2 sons and to sacrifice himself. Already he was too late. The boys were limp in the choking grip of the serpents, and could do nothing to free themselves. Soon the whole strength of the fierce creatures was turned against the priest, who fell with a great scream in the midst of the writhing heap. In another moment the serpents had loosened their victims, and sped back to the sea, leaving the mangled bodies behind them on the beach. The people stared at the horrible sight in silence, sobered in the midst of their festival at the dreadful thing that had occurred. "It is clear enough that the image is sacred," declared Priam finally, "since terrible vengeance was overtaken the man who struck at it with a spear. Let us finish our prayers to the gods, and then we will attach ropes to this image and haul it up to the citadel, even if we have to make a breach in the wall to get in." All applauded the wisdom of Priam, save Cassandra, the king's mad daughter, in whose prophecies no one believed. Led on by the false tale of Sinon and the effect of the serpents Poseidon had sent to ensure the taking of Troy, the people hauled up the horse and broke down their walls, little thinking as they tugged on the long ropes that they were dragging destruction into their town.